Welcome to another episode of ActivateenCC, where we cross the chasm with community chats. Welcome to ActivateenCC. Today, we're really excited to be talking to Zahara Chetty. She is the founder of the African Futures Academy, a conscious design coach and trauma and technology futurist. Her work integrates transdisciplinary insights from the fields of psychology, anthropology, computer science, education, business management, strategy, design, and spirituality. I just love that. And she helps navigate complexity for more human-centered, conscious, and effective problem solving. We also have Shivan Mavalal, and he is currently employed as a process engineer in training. He completed his BSc in chemical engineering and currently pursuing his master's in chemical engineering. And he is, he's our young professional learning how to navigate his way around the working world. So with that, I would love to ask Zahara, a few questions on what made you, Zahara, choose this path? Because when I was looking at your bio, I saw this beautiful timeline where it's almost like you had this bucket list. and that was fascinating to me. I would love to learn more.
So yeah, well, I did have a bucket list, but that was when I was in high school. So I made this list of 100 things I wanted to do with my life. And, I just started doing them because I always struggled with the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was interested in so many different things and I couldn't choose just one thing. So I just made this list of everything I wanted to do and I did it. And I think that was the journey that I went on that helped me to figure out what I really wanted to do in the world, what kinds of problems I wanted to solve. So, I became a writer, I became a teacher, I became a designer, I did computer studies, I did programming, and I got into design. And Shivan's laughing because he was a student of mine as well. So I went through a lot of different, career paths, and I was able to shift quite easily from one to another. And each time I tried something new, it was because I had a bigger problem to solve. And I had to learn the new skills that I needed to solve these problems. And I was just, going head first into it because it was all new and needed to be solved at the time. And I think I just got used to that, looking for big problems to solve. And, I got into design thinking and futures thinking. And I just love what I do now. I think if I had to just pick one career off the bat from the beginning, it would have been really, a problem for me because I'm not that kind of person. I am into a lot of different things, and I love the work I do now because it incorporates everything that I've done in the past.
That's fascinating because a lot of times, when you're young, you're not given that option to be adventurous, right? We are adventurous till we are, maybe 7 years old or 8 years old. And then it feels like we're put in these lanes. And then once you're in a lane, you're told that, it's not really good to switch lanes.
Yeah,
so
you're definitely right. I wasn't given the option, but I'm also very rebellious. So I guess the more people tell me don't do something, probably I'm going to go and do it. So yeah, my parents also wanted me to study medicine or computer science and become an engineer. But, I had other plans and they weren't happy with it. But I think, it was my sole purpose that I had to follow. And I couldn't just live by other people's rules or definitions of what I should be.
Now you're based in South Africa, right?
Yeah, I'm in Pretoria.
And how long have you been in Pretoria? Have you always been in Pretoria?
No, so I'm from Durban. Then I got a promotion to be head of department for physical science. So I moved up to Pretoria. And then because of the school violence, I was actually hit in the face by a student. There's a lot of trauma and violence in our communities and it was just hectic. So I got into software and then I quit teaching. I thought, I needed to step back from the system and look at other ways of solving those problems. Yeah, so I've been here since 2012.
Wow. Shivan, now you're a student of Zahara. So And you're based in South Africa too. Tell us about yourself.
Okay, so as you read in my bio, yes. So I'm actually Zara at the time, Mrs. Chetty actually was one of my teachers in physical science, and I'm not sure whether she's aware or not, but a lot of her guidance has actually I factored in my decision making. So in the community I'm from, as Zahara mentioned, parents are very, very involved in the career path that you follow. Fortunately for me, my parents weren't, the pressure applying type. So I said, you know what, if I am going to do engineering, I'm going to do it on my own terms. So yeah, I'm in love with mathematics. I enjoy working with numbers and using mathematics as a tool to basically solve problems. And that's really what inspired me to pursue engineering. So I'm also from South Africa. I studied in Durban in KwaZulu-Natal. And I think it's just over a year now, well, actually approaching 2 years, that I've had to relocate for the sake of my job. So I'm in Sasol in the Free State. And I'm enjoying it. I'm new to the work world. And part of the reason why I'm doing masters is because I still have a foot in education. I'm someone that finds it very difficult to move away from textbooks. So I did that sort of as a safety net. But as I'm experiencing firsthand now, the work world is definitely very different, very challenging, has its own set of rules that you have to learn very quickly. So yeah, that's basically it about me.
That's fascinating. And hold on to that thought, because we're going to ask you about what are some of the skills which you have learned, which are coming handy, right? So Zahara and Shivan, I'd love for you to talk about what are some of the challenges that youth in South Africa are currently facing.
So for me, I've always been involved in the education system, in the schools with the youth. And even when I left, I've been going back to schools and talking to the students about, because I was always involved in innovation and all this new technology, and just out of interest, I wanted to share it with them, just to conscientize them to what's going on. And from having those conversations, one of the problems is about career pathing and the world of work and the future of work and how to navigate that. And everybody's still under the mindset that we've got to apply to university, follow a certain set degree, study those things, and then choose that career, and that's your life. But things are changing pretty rapidly, and it's not going to be that way, and the kids are not prepared for that. And then on the other hand, a very small number of kids actually go to university. 90% of them end up unemployed, and nobody's creating jobs. There's a lack of entrepreneurship. That's a big problem. It's just going to end up in more social anarchy. The crime rate is increasing, the poverty is increasing. There's no solutions for those things because people are not working on that. They're waiting for the government to fix everything. So I think also access to resources. Kids in the townships, in the poorer communities, don't have access to data, technology, or the opportunities that other kids are having. It's always the elite schools that have all these resources and all these opportunities, but the majority of the country doesn't. And we have to deal with corruption in the government and all those kinds of things that prevent us from fixing these things. So it's all about creating opportunities for kids and helping them see that there's alternative futures for themselves. And I think that for me is the biggest problem I've seen, because everybody's just kind of set with their lot and they don't see a way out of where they are right now.
Thank you. And Shivan, what are you seeing for your generation?
I think just being a recent graduate, it's very close to home. I must say that, to be very honest, part of the reason I am in a position where I can say that I'm employed is because the company that I worked for, Sasol, subsidized my study. So I was able to nab a scholarship, and that is how I entered this work world. But many of my peers have now resorted to doing masters similar to myself. But they're doing it because they will go in for a round one interview, a round two interview, and that's it. That's the extent of that interview process. And then they're sitting at home, not knowing really what to do. So there's a major problem with employment. But something that Zahara mentioned is, I think, generationally speaking, it's a very one-track mind, one-dimensional kind of thinking, which is, in order for me to be successful, I need to go to university and I need to get a degree and I need to get a job, and that is the mark of success. That is the definition of career. But something I'm observing for myself now, being in the work world, is there is a practical side to life that is not given much emphasis. So that is something that I feel is severely lacking in our country, which is there is so much of emphasis placed on academic success, but not much attention is paid on developing skill sets. And that I feel that is a major issue regarding the youth in our country specifically. But then also more to the point is our education system itself. As someone who has been through the process of primary school and then secondary school and then approaching tertiary studies, there's a major disconnect. And while the schooling system is trying to make things easier, university isn't easier. So you fall into this trap, and it's like being like a headless chicken, because all of a sudden you're dealing with the stress of the work and the volume of the work, and you're not sure how to digest that and how to approach it. And something I actually jotted down is we're not encouraging a community of entrepreneurship. A lot of people, like I mentioned earlier on, career is going to university and then entering the work world, but there's more avenues. And something that severely lacks is identifying a need in the community at large, or service provision and so on, and trying to build a business around that. So I think business acumen definitely lacks in my generation, at least.
That's really well said, because in fact, Santiago is in Spain, and he is our digital content producer. And we are separated by miles, thousands of miles, but at the same time, he like you is also a recent graduate, right? And it's understanding that how to look at everything not in the same, the way we used to think is not the way we need to continue to think, because that's not going to help us in the new world. And that's why I'd like to come to Zahara's 21 skills mapping. Zahara, when you sent that to me, I was looking at it, and I wanted to actually say, can you do this right now? And let's just spend the rest of the call, or next few weeks on this, because it's so important. Every box that you have on that chart. I'd love for you to talk more about that.
Yeah, so I think this idea started a couple of years ago. So I've been working with ed tech companies, remotely for quite a few years, and it's always about things in the education system. And from looking at what's happening in different countries, you can see there's a disconnect between the systems that we created for education and what society actually needs these days. And there's a lack of skills, as Shivan mentioned. So these are skills, that I've been researching, from my background in psychology, in anthropology, in future studies, design thinking, and just, from an educational perspective, there's so many things that kids are not equipped to do when they finish school, or even when they finish university and they start work, and they're like, at a loss of what real life is like. They can't deal with that. But I had a different experience when I was in school, right? So when I was a kid, I went to this experimental program where they taught us divergent thinking and lateral thinking and metacognition and all these things. So I had a very different educational experience than a normal classroom. And that really actually helped me to be able to navigate so many different careers and adapt so quickly and learn, things in different industries. And that is exactly what's needed now, especially going into the fourth industrial revolution. And I realized my experience is very different from everybody else in school. So they are unable to adapt as quickly as I can because they don't have those skills that I learned. So I think also, these skills, they are available, but they're also very elitist. You'll find this in the, very expensive schools, the very elite schools, or things, these programs where you teach gifted children, which was exactly where I got it. But what about the rest of the kids? What about the 95% who doesn't have access to these things? So my mission was to get these skills to the people who actually need it, the people who need to solve these problems and make a life and adapt to change and, all of those things. We're not giving them these skills in schools. So where are they supposed to get it from? And I don't have time to convince the government and change all these systems. So I said, you know what, let me just do what I can do. And that's all anybody can do. You do your bit, and hopefully, other people can, together we can collaborate and get these skills to as many people as possible. So yeah, there's 21 skills, and they're all underpinned by this one thing, which I realized was the most important. So as much as we're focusing on technologies and, all these other thinking skills that we need, I think the fundamental thing that we need, especially going to the future, is conscious leadership. Because we cannot build new technologies, we cannot solve problems without having conscious intent for what we want to do. Because then we're just designing our way into oblivion or dystopia, right? Yeah, so that is the biggest thing that we've learned, that you cannot have all these higher order thinking skills if you don't have consciousness, in these people for us to even be able to use those skills properly.
And when you talk about, there were a couple of others that I wanted to go deeper into, which is algorithmic thinking. And how do you define that?
So algorithmic thinking is just basically the steps to solving a problem, right? So I used to teach computer science and programming, and it basically teaches you the methods of solving problems. And this is, I think, a fundamental thing that's missing in a lot of kids. They do simple things, in life where you need to go step by step to solve things, especially when we're working with computers and robots and all these other things that are going to come up in future. Kids need to have a bit of that thinking to be able to, sequence a series of steps and to figure out things so that they don't have to come up from scratch each time, So we need to be able to also understand machines. Machines think in this procedural way. They take instructions in this way, in the form of an algorithm. So if we cannot understand that, how are we even supposed to program them? So apart from learning to code, I think the fundamental thing behind that code is the problem solving steps.
Yeah. And the other problem is that education has become so test score oriented that, before that we actually make students believe that for that it's a problem and answer. Everything is about a problem and a correct answer. Where in life there are no correct answers, right? It's a lifelong journey of finding your own truth, so to speak. So one of the things that when I was growing up, we moved around a lot. So we lived in California during my high school, in Canada. Then it was in my middle school years, there was a lot of moving back and forth. And one of the things we found was in that you became more resilient because you weren't sure. And in that uncertainty, instead of seeing that as a disadvantage, it became an advantage because then you knew how to adapt. But at the same time, while you're going through it, it feels horrible. It's only in hindsight you're thinking, okay, this actually helped me. So Shivan, what, as Zahara, as Mrs. Chetty was going Mrs. Chetty to you.
We have a problem with that, right? Because he always calls me ma'am, and I told him.
As she was talking about this, what did you learn that was most valuable for you in the workforce? When we're talking about, I don't like to call it soft skills. There's nothing soft about it. These are essential skills, right?
Yeah. I looking at Zahara's 21 skills, something that really did stick out, and this is actually the skill that you did discuss, which was the algorithmic thinking. I think as human beings, we need to acknowledge that we're very ritualistic. When we get into a habit, that's it, right? And it's no different to how we approach problems. It's like a set recipe, but you can do different things to change it up a bit. And what I had to realize in the workplace is that it's not a new problem every day. The basis is the same, and you approach it the same, but then the nuances, that's where you need to pay attention, because that's where it diversifies a little bit, and that's when it may require a little more attention than the baseline itself. But that is something that I think, discussing with my peers. So we're considered engineers in training, and whenever we get together and we have these conversations about how we're navigating ourselves through the workforce, especially, there's always this complaint about how we're not sure what we're doing. We feel like we're not learning. But there's nothing more that you need to learn. You need to get the fundamentals correct, form a good foundation, and build on that. That really has helped me in the workplace. Initially, I used to find myself being inundated, wanting to cry even. But I think sometimes you just need to get a grip of reality and tell yourself, no, there's a stepwise procedure to doing this, and this is how you approach it. So yeah, that definitely helps.
That's great. Zahara, I wanted to ask about the other thing that stood out, which was your thoughts on anti-fragility, right? And you mentioned divergent thinking and how we can become more resilient and adaptive. Let's talk more about that, because we should be stronger more than ever, right? Based on where we are or what we have learned in generationally, but we aren't. And why is that?
Yeah, so for me, anti-fragility means, being able to get stronger from difficulties and gain from disorder. So basically, what's happening in the world right now, things are getting more chaotic, increasingly so, right? And this pandemic showed us that, and this is not going to be the last difficult thing that we're going to face. But I think our instinct tells us to move away from pain and difficulty and take the easy way out. But when you're making conscious decisions to grow and to learn, you face the hard things. It's okay if things are hard, but we don't learn that. We always, taught to avoid things that are difficult, to avoid things that are painful. But then you never learn. It's like a muscle. You get stronger by lifting heavier weights each time. So even with problem solving, whatever area we're talking about, whether it's your personal life or your work life, the more difficult things you face, the stronger you get and the better you get at solving those kinds of problems. But if we're always going to run away from them, we're never going to become stronger. So that is the key thing about teaching kids, that it's okay, to go through difficulty, because it makes you better. It makes you better able to solve these problems. And I think in Africa, we have this unique situation where we have so many problems that we face on a daily basis. And that gives us the opportunity to learn from that, to thrive through that, to become these great problem solvers and develop, great things out of that. We just need to be conscious about it.
So if I have to replay that, is what you're saying that we actually need to understand that we are stronger than we think we are?
Yeah, definitely. So I think our first instinct, initial reaction to anything is to get away when things are difficult, to avoid it. But if we, have this conscious intent and we are aware, I think self-awareness is the key thing here. We're aware that this is a difficult situation and we have to put some effort into solving it, whatever the situation is, then we give ourselves the opportunity to grow. And that's what we really miss, yeah.
True. And what, as you are a futurist, right? What is futurist thinking? How can we become better? Typically when you say futurist thinking, people will say, "Oh, you're a dreamer. Why are you dreaming? Don't dream about the future." how would you define futures thinking in respect to our youth?
Yeah, so there's always this debate about, futurists and the methods they use for futures thinking and foresight work and all of that, and whether everybody should have access to that. But, everybody thinks about their future. Everybody has a future that they striving towards, whether, you're consciously doing it or unconsciously. But we want people to be more conscious about the futures that they choose for themselves. Instead of just going along with the vision that someone else created, you all have the opportunity, especially the young people, right? The next generation. I mean, you're very brainwashed about what the future might look like by the news, the media, by education, by other people. But you've got to think for yourself, what kind of world do I want to live in? What kind of world do I want to contribute to? And I think the work that we're trying to do is make kids aware that they have a say, that they have conscious intent, they have creativity, they have all these skills that they can use to create the kind of society that they want to live in. They're not just going to inherit all these broken things from us, because we created an unconscious world. We want them to create things that are better than what we created. But they need to be able to think about those things for themselves, like, imagine different scenarios, look at different opportunities and trends and innovations and solve the problems that need to be solved. So it's all about thinking about how you fit into the future, what vision you want, and collectively what that adds up to.
That's beautiful. Shivan, how would you say that you've been able to empower yourself? Where have you empowered yourself? And do you have, when we're talking about futures thinking, how do you see your future?
It was actually reconnecting with Zahara, which made me really consider this whole futuristic way of thinking. Like you initially said, when I would hear about this futurism thing, why are people dreaming? The world is the way it is. Why change the architecture? Why redefine it? But the world is dynamic. It's changing, and it's changing faster than I think we realize that it is. And we can't use our preconceived notions and the solutions that we used previously to solve problems that haven't even occurred as yet. So it was in my discussions with Zahara where I've had to really reconsider what career means to me and what that means for my future. I'm someone who I'd like to say was a product of a brainwashed kind of thinking, very one-track mind with blinkers on. But I think what we need to realize is that while the world may be going on and there are things that are outside of our control, what we are in control of is our consciousness and how we perceive things. So yeah, I think the world really needs to subscribe to that. It's challenging because, like I said, human beings are very ritualistic. We don't like to move away from our habits and what we know to be as gospel. But I think the sooner we catch on to that, and the sooner we realize the importance of not just saying that we are conscious, but actively being conscious of what is going on around us, the better it is for ourselves, and just ultimately changing the world for the better. There's so much going on, and if we just apply ourselves, considering the betterment of mankind, I think that's the ultimate goal. That's what it should be for everyone.
Thank you. Zahara, this one's really also close to my heart because a lot of the programming that Activateen's been doing, we've been working on new media literacy. So can you talk more to that?
Yeah, so the world is changing. There's so many things happening. We want kids to be able to understand, what are the new types of ways they're going to get information, how to interact with that. I mean, there's no point in us, still teaching kids how to write postcards or letters in school when they have so many new things to face, and new technologies for media, for content are being developed all the time. I mean, that is basically how we live right now, right? We're bombarded with new kinds of content in all kinds of forms, and that is going to be changing, increasingly as we go along. Trying to communicate with one another, to share information, to design information, But once we finish school, kids have no clue how to interact with these things and how to critically assess them. So when does that education come in? Do they have to learn that incidentally? They cannot be critical thinkers using this kind of medium if they've never been exposed to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's beautifully said, because they are already immersed in this new media. It is just that what's happening is, instead of them being told how to use it in a more productive way, you're swimming in it, but you are not able to channel what you know and make it work for you. Yeah, absolutely. And I also wanted to touch about cross-cultural competency, because I know that one of what was really important for me and the Activateen team was that we weren't just sitting in our own bubble. This needed to be more cross-cultural, having this conversation in a more global, with a more global intent in mind, because there's so much about what we're all going through, which is similar, as well as localized. It's almost this paradox that we have on our hands. So I'd love to hear your perspective about cross-cultural competency, which is also one of the skills that you mentioned.
Yeah, so this is a very, very important skill, right? Because for me personally, I've been working with teams across the globe for many years, right? And initially it was a bit difficult because there were different languages, different cultures, different countries, different ways of thinking about business, about innovation, about communication, about dealing with your customers. And you've got to understand people, right? And I had to learn that on the fly, but it's becoming an increasingly common thing for people to work with teams all across the globe, especially now that they're working remotely. But in South Africa, I mean, we have a problem just understanding the cultures in our own society, because we grew up very segregated. We were not exposed to other cultures in our own country. Now, for us to go into this future, this world of work where everybody's all together on the internet, working with each other, working with people from all countries, all languages, all backgrounds, we don't know how to navigate that. And I think that's a really, really important skill for everybody to have going forward, because there's so many of us collaborating on different projects, and the kinds of projects that we're working on increasingly need that. We need a global team behind that, and this is going to be a very important skill, how you relate to different people from different walks of life, and how you use that for solving problems. If you cannot even work with people that are different to you, how are you supposed to collaborate on problem solving? That's a very fundamental thing to communicate with them.
And Shivan, what about your organization? Do you have a diverse population there?
Yeah, it is actually quite diverse, and I think just being in South Africa, we have like 11 official languages, and there's more than one like racial group, and especially where I am, I think you get a bit of an insight to a person's upbringing in the way they approach you, in the way they talk to you, in the way they conduct themselves in meetings and so on. And something that I've had to realize very quickly is you have to be very respectful of that, because the workplace isn't just about technical skill and ability, because work is but one of the facets that takes place in a professional environment. First and foremost, we are, I don't want to say socializing as in having a good time, but as Zahara said, it's very collaborative, and you need to be very respectful, and you need to acknowledge that people's culture, the way they the way they are brought up, the way they are raised, governs the way they perceive the world, and that is what they bring to the table. So you have to be very open-minded, and also willing to learn about other people and what they can bring to the table.
Thank you. And the other skill that just popped up, of course, everyone's been talking about design thinking and problem solving and critical thinking. But what I wanted to ask you about was metacognition. Zahara, can you talk more about that?
So, you know, in a nutshell, metacognition is about thinking about your own thinking, right? Learning how you think, understanding, you know, how you learn, you know, being able to use your thinking to plan and monitor and assess, you know, how you're learning and adapt that. So if you're learning something and it's not going great, you need to be able to change your thinking and your learning process, and so that you can move forward. So it's not just, okay, you know, like how we do it in school where you teach and the kid just absorbs things and that's it, you memorize it and that's it. No, so these are like different skills of learning, being aware of your own ability to learn and where you have problems and where you need to change and where you need to adapt, so that you can adapt to new contexts all the time, because the world is changing, the world of work is changing, our societies are changing. You're going to have to learn new skills in everything, right? But if you don't even know how to learn, you're going to be at a loss to learn those new skills. So metacognition is kind of a fundamental thing about learning about yourself and how you think and what works for you and what doesn't work.
I love that. I think I said something in the last episode where it was, if you don't understand yourself, you're going to go around misunderstanding everyone else, right? And that brings me to cognitive load management, because I believe both of them are connected, aren't they?
Yeah, so, you know, like we mentioned about the new media literacy, I mean, we are inundated with new information all the time in so many different ways. And I think everything we designed is designed basically to get your attention. I mean, the whole field of user experience design is about creating products that get people's attention, and everything is vying for your attention all the time. You know, your brain doesn't get a rest, and it becomes a problem, you know, because we are like switched on all the time. It's very stressful, and we need to be able to manage that, you know, our capacity to process information and know what we, you know, need to process and what we don't need to process, and just being able to deal with a lot of information. Because I mean, the amount of information even I as a researcher have to deal with on a daily basis compared to somebody working 100 years ago, you know, it's a very, very different situation. So we need a different capacity, you know, brain power to be able to deal with that, and different skills to deal with that kind of information. And it's also, you know, one fundamental problem we're having right now is about making sense of that information. So it's not just about processing that information, it's about creating meaning out of that. You know, a lot of people, you know, read posts on social media and then they become experts, or they think they're experts on a topic, right? They don't even read a book about it, but like they know everything, they can have a conversation about it. And that's very superficial knowledge, you know. So we are bombarded with all this superficial information, but there's like, you know, lack of depth in understanding anything.
Yes, that's a great segue to this this conversation I had with my daughter. She saw some post about you know, the older generation criticizing Gen Z about being the dumb generation because of so much of you know, so the social and because of Google, and she said, she said this just made me so mad, you know. And and it's true that we generalize, you know, we just say, well, this Gen Z uses Google, so they're not thinking. But generation to generation, every generation is thinking in a different way. They are utilizing information in a different way. They're making sense of it in a different way. And just because in my, you know, my generation, we had fax machines, does not mean that I look down and say, well, you all don't have fax machines, so, you know, there's something wrong with you. It's almost this perception and these intergenerational concepts that we have, you know, about each other. So with that, Shivan, how do you find, you know, how do you look at the intergenerational conflicts or challenges within the workplace?
This is this is something that I have raised to my mentor, my line manager, anyone who will listen to me about it. The thing about being in an industry, especially a chemical industry, is in South Africa is companies tend to hold on to the older folk. I like to call them furniture, because of the experience that they have, right? It is really, really difficult to gauge with someone who is from a different generation. And it's almost tiring for me because I have to sort of um, dumb myself down to not come across as being arrogant or me knowing better, or even if I have a suggestion or a recommendation, I find myself having to strategize. It's like a game of chess, an impossible game of chess, because sometimes even if I present an idea forward, I'm told, oh, your generation, you think you know everything, you're lazy, get rich quick method, easy solutions. That's what you guys want. But it's not that. I mean, ultimately, it's a collaboration. We both want the best possible outcome. But sometimes I think we're able to see things quicker, not because we're smarter, but I think just being the generation, as you said, generation by generation, we think differently. So sometimes we're able to see things from a different perspective, and it's not always welcome. So it can be a bit of a challenge. And like I said, it becomes a game. You sort of have to strategize how you're going to get your point across. So it can be challenging, but I guess it's always going to be there. I doubt it's ever going to change. People always come in with preconceived notions. So I guess you have to be willing to find a middle ground.
Do you see that organizations are flattening, or do you feel like it's still pretty, hierarchical?
It definitely is hierarchical, as you put it. What I found is, like I said, because I'm a junior engineer, it's not that my opinions and my recommendations are not respected, but what I've found is I feel like if I had maybe like 10 years experience and I said that, if I made that recommendation having that 10 years experience, it wouldn't be as frowned upon, or it wouldn't be, I wouldn't get that hesitation to accept that. So it is very, very hierarchical, as you put it. And it's often difficult when you're at the bottom. I see it as a pyramid, and it's very difficult when you're at the bottom. And what I find is I have to honestly work and work and work before I am taken seriously. And it's not that I'm not skilled. I'm also, yes, I'm learning, but aren't we all learning, you know?
Yeah, that's very, and that's where loss happens in organizations when we allow, these, when we put everything into boxes, and there is no, and that siloed, it's a siloed way of thinking, it's a siloed way of behavior too. And Shivan, a lot of that comes from fear, right? You fear the knowledge that the youth have, because they not only they have the knowledge that you don't particularly have access to, because you're not swimming in that generation. But at the same time, there is also that, well, we have more experience, so we know that these things cannot work. So it's almost like that middle ground that we need to meet. Zahara, I wanted to ask you one more thing about your 21 skills chart. Let's talk about emerging technologies. I know that you've mentioned automation and artificial intelligence and data literacy in your posts. Can we touch on that really quickly? And I know, and I also want to talk to you about the African Futures Academy that you founded, and what are your plans for that?
So emerging technologies is pretty much what everybody's focusing on with the fourth industrial revolution, right? It's all this stuff about AI, robotics, and coding, and that kind of thing. And those are important skills to have, but these technology skills are going to be changing all the time. So we can't be banking, on just a few set of skills. So whatever new technologies come out, kids need to be able to harness that, to use that, as solutions, to imagine new ways of dealing with that. But I think this is just one aspect of it, and a lot of education around the fourth industrial revolution is just focused solely on the tech, without the thinking skills, without the consciousness, without, you know, creativity and all of those things. So we have emerging technologies here, you know, just about the technology, but for us, it's just one small aspect of the bigger picture.
Right. And tell us about African Futures Academy.
Yeah, so I've been, you know, working overseas with a lot of different companies, with startups in innovation, in ed tech, and you know, it was so exciting for me, you know, to be able to be a part of that and learn so many new things and be able to use all these skills that I had, and it created a lot of opportunities for me, you know, to be able to work anywhere in the world and with any team and do lots of different things. And you know, and I still live in South Africa, and I'm, you know, looking around, I think a lot of people don't have that opportunity that I have. So, you know, all this, the experiences that I have were basically because of the kind of, you know, education I got through these special education classes, right? And I thought, we need to get these skills to as many people as possible, especially in Africa, because we have problems that nobody else is solving as a developing continent, right? And we don't want solutions from everywhere else because they have a different context, they have a different culture, they have a different way of looking at things. We've got our own problems, we've got our own people here who are, you know, geniuses. They are so creative, they are so, you know, entrepreneurial, but those, you know, those innate traits are not being used, they're not being put to good use, they're not being, you know, shaped in the right ways, and kids don't have the opportunity. So my intention with this African Futures Academy is to be able to get these skills to as many kids as possible. And you know, I've started this just by going to schools, by talking to kids and teachers and principals, and understanding, you know, what their mindset is, what are they lacking, you know, where the disconnect is happening, you know, with this education system and the future of work. And you know, that it just opened up some doors, you know, and conversations. And there's a lack of awareness. There's a lack of awareness that there is a problem. So I think the first part of our, you know, the systemic change that we're trying to create is about awareness of these, you know, these skills that they are needed, you know, in the next generation. And Africa has the youngest median age of any continent on the planet, right? We have the median age is about 19 years old. So that means half of the continent is under 19 years old. In the next 10 years, they're going to be like the powerhouse, you know, of the economy. And if we don't give them the right skills, now what's going to happen to this continent in the next 10 years? So this is, you know, the aim of collaborating with as many people as possible who also share the same goals to develop Africa, but to be able to give the right skills to the masses, and not just the elite schools who will have the money to get them.
Well, I'm really, really so glad that you're spearheading this, because we always think that, you know, a big organization or the government needs to pick these problems up, but if everyone does what they're, you know, everyone cleans their corner of the world, or helps in some way, you know, that's where change happens. And it's such a privilege to talk to you, Zahara. Thank you for making the time. And I know that Activateen and African Futures Academy, we are looking at partnering and helping and collaborating. I'm looking forward to that. And Shivan, I really appreciate you finding the time, because your perspective is what, you know, is what we need as well. It's important for us to listen more to what your generation has to say. And especially because we have a teacher student here. I like that even more because I reached out to you, Zahara, and said we need your student, and she gave us your name. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
I must say, I always tell Zahara that at the time in school, I never appreciated her presence there. It's only when you kind of leave the proverbial nest, do you realize how big the world is. And I always regret not having taken her words seriously. So, yeah.
Yes, listen to your teachers.
Well, you know, you have an opportunity to be involved in the African Futures Academy now, right?
Yeah, yes. Definitely.
Yes. So thank you both. And we are so grateful to have you on the show today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shaku.
Thank you very much.
Great being here. Thank you. And we look forward to collaborating with you as well. I think we share the same mission. So it's really great to be here.
Thank you.
Be sure to subscribe to our channel and to turn on the notification bell for our latest videos.